How to improve your game sense in Black Ops Cold War, really any Call of Duty Part 2. In this series, I provide you with tips on how to improve your game sense, as well as examples on how to implement them in your gameplay. If you didn't catch Part 1, I give you 5 tips on how to elevate your map awareness, and you can click the link above or the link in the description below to catch that. But in today's video, Part 2, I'll be giving you 5 tips on how to read and manipulate spawns. Now, understanding spawns not only helps you predict which direction an enemy team might be coming from, but you can also manipulate them to force the opponent through a specific lane. And this is especially helpful in game modes like Domination, Team Deathmatch, but especially in Hardpoint, because reading and manipulating spawns in Hardpoint, in my opinion, is 60% of the battle. But you can even use these tips in Control, because although you can't completely flip spawns in Control, you can still manipulate them so that you can place an enemy team as far away from an objective as possible. But let's start with the basics with a look at Nuketown. Because of its small size, it's far less complicated, and if you can understand the spawns on Nuketown, we can scale up from there. The 2 main spawns are in the backyards of the greenhouse and the yellow house. Let's focus on the greenhouse. Now there's a second imaginary line to note that splits every main spawn into sub-spawns. And depending on your opponent's location, the system will place you into one of these 2 areas. For example, if an opponent is pushed up on this side of the map, they will block this left sub-spawn, and the system will likely place you on the opposite side to give you an opportunity to prepare for a gunfight. Essentially, the spawn system's goal is to place you as far away from danger within your main spawn zone as possible. And if that isn't possible, the spawns will then flip and you'll start spawning in the other main zone. In a game mode like Domination, the system will do its best to keep you within your main spawn and use your secondary zones as much as possible to give you the best chance at taking back control of your home objective. Flipping spawns is a lot easier when it comes to Hardpoint or Team Deathmatch because unlike Domination, you aren't tied to a home objective. Now, if the enemy team is blocking both spawns, meaning they have presence in your main spawn as well as their main spawn, the system will then utilize what's called a bailout spawn, which if you've played enough Nuketown, you'll know is in this section next to the Jeep, although there are many on any given map. Now, when it comes to a game mode like Control, you can't completely flip the spawn, but like I said before, you can still manipulate them and force them into one of the alternate spawn areas. And the last basic term to be aware of is split spawns, which happens when one of the teams is so spread out on the map, at which point you get this inconsistent spattering of spawns on both sides. But now that we have the basics down, let's move on to tip number 1, and that's how and when to flip spawns. And this pertains primarily to Hardpoint, where the objective is constantly shifting on the map and you want to try to secure spawns for the current hill or future hills. But to flip spawns, there are 3 main factors that come into play. And the first is that you need to be in or around the enemy's main spawn. And the second is that you need to get a number of kills within that area. And the third factor is your team's positioning on the map. Now the first step is to learn the location of every hardpoint and the order in which they rotate, because that informs your decision on which spawns you need to secure and when to rotate. And yes, you do get a 10-second notice on your minimap telling you where the next hill is, but oftentimes that's not enough because they get the same notification they're likely setting up just like you. Now let's jump into some gameplay on Garrison or Hardpoint. We're currently on P1 with about 30 seconds left on this hill. I see that my team is contesting the hill and they're applying enough pressure to keep the enemy occupied in that area. We're currently losing by 40 points and I know that the next hill, P2, is in the radar truck area. Garrison's 2 main spawns are anywhere beyond these yellow lines. However, there is also a second imaginary line to be conscious of, which is further back in each of the spawns. More on that in a second. We're currently spawning on the right side of the map. However, the preferred spawn for the next hill is on the left side, because the only way to break this hill from our current spawn is to bottleneck through top green, which is very exposed, or to flank all the way through mid. So the best way to hold this hill is by securing the spawns on the left, as it provides the constant stream of reinforcements, safer and quicker access to the hill. So I decided to rotate early to give us the best chance of getting a full 60 seconds. Now if you look at the minimap, you can see the majority of my team is pushed up in the mid section of the map, which means that we've taken control of half of the map. I decided to push up through the top side of the map because if I can get enough kills in this area, I can possibly flip the spawns. However, it's important to note that although I'm blocking the foremost segment of their main spawn, the enemy team can still spawn in their safety spawn, which is behind the second line. But my decision to rotate at this moment was not random. It was because of my team's substantial presence in the mid-map area, which is encroaching on their spawn side. The best way to understand this is to draw a line from me to my team. The fact that this line is so close to their spawn means that it'll likely flip because the system will determine that this side of the map is no longer safe for the opponent to be spawning in. So I anchor here for a moment because I know that they're likely going to begin setting up for the next hill, and I get this kill and I immediately push forward. I don't bother challenging the guy shooting at me because I need kills further into their spawn. I see this guy, so I challenge it, I get the kill, and although I die in the process, it looks like it was just enough because I successfully secured the spawns for next. So it's important to remember that when you're trying to flip spawns, your presence in the enemy spawn alone is not enough, but it's the kills in that area that matter. Furthermore, those kills won't matter unless you have a team with you or your team is pushed up far enough that they're not blocking the spawn that you're trying to send the opponent to. Here's a great example of why your team's position is important when it comes to flipping spawns. I'm rotating early for P4 on raid Hardpoint, which is the basketball hill, but I still have teammates in P3, which is the garage on the other side of the map. Both P3, the garage hill, and P4, the basketball hill, are located inside of the two main spawn zones. Now I'm the only person here, so I do my best to hold off these enemy pushes until my team arrives, but despite getting 3 kills in the spawn, I still couldn't flip it, because you'll see here my team is blocking all of the other spawns, and that's why the system elected to place the enemy in the secondary spawn, which is up here in the laundry jungle area. So remember, when you're trying to flip spawns, try to time it with your team's positioning on the map. Moving on to tip number 2, force your opponents to use a specific route by manipulating secondary spawns. If you have a good hold on a hill and you want the enemy team to try to break it through a specific lane, just push up on the opposite side of the map where you want them to be. It sounds a bit complicated, but here's a good demonstration of this. We're on P2 Apocalypse and we have a great hold as well as the preferred spawns. Rather than joining my team on the hill, I decide to push through the bottom side of the map for 3 reasons, but the main one is that I know that my team has the best shot of holding this hill if the enemy team continues to bottleneck through this tunnel area. My position here forces them to spawn on the far top side of the map. Now, because it would take too long to flank all the way around, it forces them to keep flowing through that bottleneck. The second reason is that if they do decide to flank, I can cut it off mid-map or at least stagger it. And lastly, the next hill is the trench area. My hope is that my team will then rotate to new and the enemy team will still be in this area trying to break through the tunnel. As I continue to push into their main spawn, my team's rotation to the bottom side of the map has now shifted our map control to the left side, thus securing this spawn, which gives us an advantage for P3, P4, and even P5. When it comes to your positioning, try to think 1, 2, even 3 hills ahead, because that can make or break you. Manipulating spawns is also a great tactic to use in control, because you have a lot more flexibility without the risk of flipping spawns. Here's an example from a professional Call of Duty League match between Optic Chicago and the Paris Legion. They're currently playing raid control and Optic is on defense and about to lose the B point, but watch their positioning as Paris completes the capture. Number 7 in Envoy and number 5 in Formal rotate to the bottom side of the Paris Legion spawn, which then forces all of Paris to start spawning on the top right, which is the furthest spawn from the next objective, the A point, forcing them to flow through the pool side where Optic has a full setup. By manipulating spawns, you not only know where your opponent's going to go, but you've basically made that decision for them. And that leads into how to counter manipulated spawns with tip number 3. Don't ignore where you're spawning and use it to your advantage. Where you spawn can reveal your enemy's position and can tell you whether or not they're thinking ahead. The best way to demonstrate is on this Hardpoint game on Miami Strike. We're currently trying to break through this 3rd hill, but when I die, I spawn in on the top street side of the map. Now this raises an immediate red flag because I know that the next hill is this bottom alley area, and my spawn location tells me that the enemy team has a presence in that area and is likely setting up for the next hill. So with that information, I head over to clear it out, and sure enough, I encounter one, and then another. Where you spawn can reveal your enemy's position, and in a case like this, it can tell you that they're thinking ahead. And yes, it might take a little bit more time to go all the way around and clear it out, but they're counting on you just going where they force you to go. So recognize when you're being manipulated and counter it. Moving on to tip number 4, how to recognize and avoid an unintentional spawn flip. Sometimes you or your teammates get a little too overzealous and you end up pushing up too far, causing an unfavorable spawn flip. Obviously, you should try to avoid doing this, but learn how to recognize when it's about to happen so you aren't caught off guard. Here's a great example on Apocalypse Hardpoint. We're on P1 and I'm anchoring near P2 to maintain these spawns, but my team is pushing too far forward and have left no room for the enemies to spawn except for here in the temple area. I quickly realize that the spawns are about to flip, and as you can see, I begin to look behind me. Sure enough, this enemy spawns out in the temple, and after killing him, I know that I'm no longer safe in that position, so I jump down, because the best way to flip it back is to gain control of this temple area. I take 2 gunfights here and I play my life until my teammates arrive for help, because a staggered push can put us in a bad position, and just like that, we took back the favorable spawns as well as the hill. If the majority of your team is pushed past you and they're no longer spawning behind you, it's time to turn around because the enemy is likely coming from that direction. And my 5th and final tip is learn when to plan ahead and when to focus on the current objective. Now, I used to fall into this mistake constantly, and sometimes I still do, where I forego helping my team on the current hill in order to try to secure the spawns for the next. But if I'm unsuccessful, what happens is I didn't help put enough pressure on the current hill and contest it or capture it that we lose all the points on that hill and the next one. This game on Apocalypse is a perfect example where my team and I had a series of unsuccessful attempts at flipping the spawns for P2, while the enemy team soaked up all of the time on P1. And as you can see here, I have no help at this point in securing spawns. And then I fall right before P2 pops. And now we've not only lost a full 60 on the first hill, but potentially the second, which is even harder to break. Don't miss the forest for the trees. Learn when to cut your losses, because even if I was successful in flipping spawns for P2, we lost all those points on P1, we'd be back where we started with an even score. So sometimes it's best to contest and snag a little bit of time on the current hill, and then use that momentum to push through to the next. And with that, those are my 5 tips on how to read and manipulate spawns. Let me know in the comments which tip you found the most helpful, and if there are any subjects you'd like me to cover in this series. In part 3, I'll be covering how to get the most out of your equipment, as well as how to reach those higher score streaks and use them more efficiently. If you'd like to go back and watch part 1, you can click the link in the description, or there's a link at the end of the video. If you enjoyed the video and found it helpful in any way, please consider leaving a like, and if you'd like to continue following along with this series, definitely subscribe for more videos about Call of Duty and how to improve your gameplay. But with that, this was Sablehound. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Hey, I want to be famous.